Hi everyone. Today we're going to talk a little bit about formative assessment or assessment for learning. We're going to talk a little bit about what it is, what effects it has on student learning. I'll give you some examples, and then we'll also tie it into what we've been talking about in the last couple of faculty meetings with differentiation. I'm going to have you watch a quick little video here to kind of explain what formative assessment is, and then we'll talk about more specifics after it's over.
So here's a scenario. You take your car to the DMV, they do an inspection and it doesn't pass. Should they haul it off to the junkyard to be used as scrap metal? No. They give you feedback as to exactly what the problem is, and you're expected to take that information and go and make improvements and come back. That's formative assessment in a nutshell. My research interest is to understand the effects of formative assessment on students. I'm particularly interested in using it in an online environment and how this impacts people who study mathematics. So why am I interested and what is the importance? Well, the first question we have to ask is if paying attention to the teacher's day-to-day classroom assessment will pay off. Well, Paul Black and Dylan Williams read 700 journal articles on assessment and narrowed that down to 250 as being relevant. Then they looked at a small number of really good research studies that gave the answer to this question, does it pay off? The answer, yes. Let's consider this scenario, which has been done by several researchers, always concluding with the same general findings. We start with a sample of students, break our sample into three groups. One group gets grades only, one group gets comments only, and one group is given grades and comments. Now the researchers were interested in learning gain and interest in the subject. These were the dependent variables. So what do you think they found? The group that was given grades only showed very little or no learning gain, and in interest some went up and some went down. The group that was given comments only showed substantial learning gain, and it had a large impact on improving their interest. The group that was given grades and comments showed very little learning gain, and in interest some went up and some went down. What we need to understand here is that an assessment is only formative if it's used to modify the teaching and learning process. So if we just use assessments to get information and then enter that information into our spreadsheets, that's not formative. For example, if a teacher gets the students' assignments and gives them all grades, that's not formative. And as I described, that's actually bad to do because kids don't do anything with it other than say, I did well, I did badly, and that's the end of it. Now contrast that with homework where the teacher writes a few comments and then expects the students to work on those comments to improve it. And then they look at those comments afterwards. That's formative. In this case, homework becomes a positive part of the learning process. Now when we look at a tight experimental control pre-post test model, most educational interventions don't work. They may sound good, they may give people the warm fuzzies, but they show little or no effect. Formative assessment is one of the few that has been proven to be effective, and best of all, it can be done at very little cost. So what kind of improvement can we expect? Well, if we take the average improvement score on tests and divide that by the average score for a typical group of students on that same test, we have an effect size. Formative assessment experiments produce typical effect sizes of between 0.4 and 0.7. This is huge, much larger than you would find in typical educational interventions. Let's start at the low end. Say we have an average student, Joe Snuffy, whose teacher starts using formative assessment. If our average student, Joe, has experiences on the low end of the effect size, 0.4, Joe would still end up in the top 35% of those not involved. Let's look at a 0.7 effect size. When they do these international comparisons between countries, the United States typically does poorly, especially in regards to mathematics. If formative assessment were used and we experienced a 0.7 effect size, we could expect to rise to one of the top 5 countries in the world. We know students who do well in school obtain higher levels of education and have a whole host of benefits, including making more money. It's been estimated that if students could have an improvement of 1 standard deviation in performance, the taxes on the extra revenue brought in from these students would pay entirely for the K-12 system within 30 years. So clearly we're playing for big stakes here. So the question I leave you with is, what would it take to convince you to start using formative assessment today?
Well, I hope the message of the video didn't get lost in the silliness. I'm not sure about what the random boxer was doing, but hey, it's at least a little bit of entertainment value there. The important piece, though, in that video is it had a good message in it. The best quote from the video that helps us best understand what formative assessment is what I have here on this slide. Assessment is only formative if it's used to modify the teaching and learning process. If you're giving a test at the end of a unit, that is summative. That's not going to measure what the students know so that you can adjust your teaching. We're talking about formative assessment that allows you to know where the kids are at by a variety of different processes, and then modify what you're doing in the classroom to help those students who are still struggling or those students that need more assistance. This is the basis for differentiation, which is what we've been talking about over the past couple of faculty meetings. Why is it important? Well, look at the effect size. Now, specifically in the video, the effect size they were referring to was the retesting at the end of a summative assessment, and that was a 0.4 to 0.7 effect size. And if you remember back from Hattie's visible learning and the focus groups that we did, you'll remember that a 0.4 is average and anything above 0.4 is good. He mentioned feedback in visible learning as a 0.73 effect size, which is a really large effect size. So formative assessment is one way that you can get feedback. Here's kind of a graphic organizer of what formative assessment does and allows us to do. It generates that timely student achievement information before the summative evaluation where they actually get a grade in the grade book. And then if you follow down to the left, that achievement information allows you to monitor individual student progress in terms of what they did or didn't learn and what they can or cannot do. And then it also allows you to evaluate your own instructional effectiveness by modifying your instruction and reteaching if necessary. Here are some examples of formative assessment. These are things that don't take a long time. In fact, they take a very short amount of time, but what you get back from them, depending on which one of these you use, is very useful information to help you plan for instruction later on. For example, exit slips. The exit slips are the ones that students give to you on the way out, whether it's a quick summary of what they learned, what they feel good about, what they don't feel good about, the questions that they have. There's all kinds of ways you can do exit slips, including using sticky notes like this one, where you could either ask a simple "what stuck today," or you could have 3 areas on your board and they just slap up a post-it on which one that they fall under, whether it's I got it, I'm good, I need a little bit more, or I'm totally lost. Those are good ways to do a very quick assessment. And if they write specifics on them, then that helps as well. Thumbs up, thumbs down, you can do that as embedded into your instructions so that you have a visual idea of who's got what. I know it's a little elementary, but kids don't seem to mind it too much. Muddiest point, this is one that I used to use quite a bit. The muddiest point is write down in 1 or 2 sentences what you understand the least about today's lesson. And when I was teaching physics, that never seemed to be a problem. They could always figure out something they didn't know. And then the fist of 5, this is again just a quick visual of showing your fingers in terms of how well you feel you know the information. 5, I know it so well I could explain it to anyone, down to 1, I'm only beginning. Some additional examples that we've been talking about some of these more recently. Poll Everywhere, you've seen that work, you had a chance to go to a training on that. Definitely formative in that you're not getting specific feedback from each individual, but at least you know where there are issues or if there are issues. Socrative, you can get more information. You can actually use Socrative as a summative evaluation as well, but it can be used as formative assessment. Having students write in journals for at the end of the hour or at the end of the week, and reading those and providing feedback to them and getting an idea of where they're at is always a good example of formative assessment, as is individual whiteboards or working with whiteboards as a group. All of these, as long as they are ungraded, can be considered to be formative assessment. To wrap up, this is just an example of specificity in feedback. We want to make sure that when we give feedback to students that we are specific to them. We also want to make sure that our formative assessments are specific enough that it gives us what we need to modify instruction and to better meet the needs of the students. So finally, before the faculty meeting, I'd like for you to kind of take a few minutes and think about the types of formative assessments that you do in your classroom, if you do any, and if you don't, start to consider some of these that I gave examples of, and we're going to have quite a bit of discussion at the next faculty meeting surrounding formative assessment and then what you do with the information. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the faculty meeting.